Alright guys, so I have to add this little prologue here because ARK posted the ARK holdings just today before I was able to get this video out. But I still think there's a lot of useful content in the video and some ideas about future holdings. So I'm going to leave the rest of it as is. And at the very end of the video, we'll compare what we predicted against what ARK released. And we'll see how we do with our picks. Hey everyone, I'm Justin. Welcome to Just Make Money. In this video, I want to give you some research about the new and upcoming ARKX Space Exploration ETF listing from ARK Invest and just what companies might make it into the fund. Based on the SEC filing, ARKX could launch as early as this week or soon after. One thing is for sure, when it does come out, the money is going to be flowing into these space sector and related companies. I love the focus and the conviction behind all of the ARK ETFs and the ARK philosophy of looking toward disruptive technology companies and innovations that are completely changing the game. ARKX will progress that vision. And I don't think anyone can realistically anticipate the timelines on which we're going to start heavily building and expanding on space infrastructure and just how fast it's all going to happen. You know, things are already accelerating rapidly and it's just going to get faster from here. So when we talk about space, not only are we going to consider what we already have, some of which I would consider legacy systems and legacy companies, but we're going to focus on the companies that are doing truly revolutionary things and paving the way to make space access simpler and more cost-effective. Now, ARK is already involved in the Japanese Global Space Equity Fund in partnership with Nikko Asset Management, and so we already have an idea of what holdings they're interested in there, and we'll factor that into our research here. I expect the ARKX fund to have some similarities to that fund, but I also expect it to be sufficiently different, sort of a version 2. And here you can see on their page they talk about space exploration, and the focus is on reusable rockets, hint hint, orbital aerospace, suborbital aerospace, aerial drones, 3D printing, enabling technology. Typical number of holdings, 30 to 50, and that's that Japan fund that they're talking about. Now, we also have the ARK SEC filing to help guide us, and this filing suggests that there will be 4 themes or sectors that the fund will be involved in. The first of these is orbital aerospace companies, companies dealing with orbital launch vehicles, as well as companies that launch, make, service, or operate platforms in orbit, like satellites. Then we have suborbital aerospace companies. They deal with drones, air taxis, and electric aviation. Third, we have enabling technology companies involved in artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, materials, energy, and storage. And then fourth, we have beneficiary companies engaged in things like agriculture, internet access, GPS, construction, imaging, and so forth. And here's just a little matrix going over those 4 sectors. So this is going to serve as a quick survey of the space industry as it stands today, with a focus on innovative companies and what the market might look like going forward. We don't have enough time to go into all these companies in depth, so this will be a sort of high-level overview. It's really to get you thinking about all the different aspects of space exploration and what's involved, and to get you thinking about some companies that you might not have thought about before. If there's something you want to see more in depth, then let me know in the comments. I'm going to focus on public companies here, but we'll also look at some companies that are going public soon, as well as some key private players to look out for in the coming years. And I'm going to talk about the 4 sectors that ARK mentioned in their filing in order, as I see some of these as necessary for enabling the next, and it's more or less the same way I originally developed this presentation before I even came across the SEC filing. And the idea here is that while all these are ultimately necessary to enable a spacefaring civilization, each stage enables the next stage to develop on or to profit from and continue pushing into space. And last, there's definitely the possibility for some overlap between some of these companies. You know, traditionally space was a very vertical play where you had to do a bunch of things in-house, but as time goes on, we're going to see more and more of these things becoming commoditized, and we're already seeing it. The infrastructure for space, with companies providing cheaper and faster launch access to low Earth orbit and beyond, off-the-shelf sensors and components, and more. Okay, so first you have launch systems, or what ARK calls orbital aerospace companies, and these provide the core infrastructure and platforms that you're going to need to get off the ground and make it into space in the first place. And this is probably what you think of first when you think of space companies, but this really is just the foundation. As soon as you have a cost-effective launch infrastructure, you can put satellites and vehicles into orbit much more cheaply and rapidly. And so I'm just going to put a bunch of companies up on the screen here, and then we'll go over them in order. And you can pause and come back to this if you want to quickly reference this list, or to do your own research. So everyone is going to think of SpaceX here, but SpaceX is still private. There's some talk of trying to get a publicly traded company that has assets in private companies, but it remains to be seen if this is going to happen, so we'll rule this out for right now. Elon has already said he isn't going to take SpaceX public until he gets to Mars, mostly because he doesn't want to be fighting Wall Street over how the company is run, and let's face it, it's going to be quite a while before SpaceX is super profitable. Starlink will likely spin out on its own and go public much earlier, But again, it remains to be seen how these play out. Now, Rocket Lab is a super interesting company. They use electrically driven pumps in their rockets, and they're making good progress on recovering vehicles. They've had a lot of successful launches, and they have really great leadership and a great team behind them. You can see here 104 satellites already launched, and these guys are going fast. I'm super excited about this one, and it's going to go public soon via SPAC called Vector Acquisition, so be sure to watch out for this one. Next we have Astra. Astra is going public via SPAC called Helicity. They're focused on smaller satellites, but let's be honest here, this is perhaps the hottest space to be in because this is going to open up so much in terms of more cost-effective R&D in outer space for all sorts of companies who traditionally haven't had access. So I'm super excited about this one too. Here's another one, Momentus, also going public via SPAC called Stable Road Acquisition Corp, ticker symbol SRAC. And this is an exciting play. So they're going to be working on infrastructure, which includes orbital assist, and they're working with SpaceX to get a demo launched. So this is where you would have a single SpaceX rocket delivering multiple satellites in space, and then the Momentus vehicle will take over to place each satellite into their own individual orbit. So it's super cool. It's going to decrease the cost of getting to orbit significantly for those satellites. And then down the road, they're going to be looking at satellite service and deorbiting and all kinds of other services. So here's a page about their services. They're calling this last mile in-space delivery. Kind of cool. Charter service. Yeah, so super cool. Refueling, repositioning. As you have to realize, these satellites, they have a limited amount of fuel on board. They have to change their orbit every now and then. And if they can't refuel, then they have to deorbit. So the idea is that Momentus would be able to help refuel them. And they already have some vehicles in development. They're pretty far along, so again, really excited about this one. Next, we have a company called Redwire. They're going public via a SPAC, again, called Genesis Park. This is another spaceflight, satellite, and sensor play. I think this is a really interesting one to research. They're talking about doing 3D printing, robotic assembly, in-space construction. And here they're talking about building cost-effective infrastructure off-planet will be crucial for addressing these civil defense and commercial customers. So I don't know as much about this one, but it just came up on my radar. I'm going to do a little bit more research on it. Next, we have Virgin Galactic, longtime player in the space, already public, already held an ARK. This is, of course, the space tourism play. Now, I have my reservations about this company, but it's very likely that we'll see it in the new ETF, even if it's just a small amount, just because it's so popular. Now, some of these next companies you might consider to be more legacy companies. They've been around for a long time, but I think they're still really important to talk about because of how much they've contributed to the space, how much they're going to keep contributing to the space, and just because there really aren't that many companies out there doing what some of these companies are doing, and because ARK already holds some of these companies in their funds. For example, Lockheed Martin, aerospace defense contractor, already in ARKQ, makes up nearly 3% of the portfolio there. Lockheed, of course, has numerous government and defense contracts, has tons of experience in space, and will likely be a component of the new ETF, part of the United Launch Alliance, ULA, which we'll talk about later. But Lockheed can really stand on its own here. And again, if you don't know Lockheed, then go do some research. They've done all kinds of cool stuff over the years. They've done rovers, launch vehicles, all kinds of stuff. And I just read this the other day. Lockheed signs an agreement with Omnispace to explore 5G in space. I've been hearing a lot more about this 5G in space. It's definitely something to research. Do you know there will be some significant engineering challenges to make it work? Seems to be a lot of interest recently in trying to get this to work. And here's just another article talking about ARK already owning Lockheed. So you can go and read this on your own. The idea here is that they are an established business. They already know how the industry works to a large extent, and they're just going to continue to grow. They're going to acquire Aerojet Rocketdyne, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, a very important company here. Boeing, another defense contractor, of course, already heavily involved in space, so don't be surprised at all if they come up, even if in a smaller amount, in the new fund. The only problem with some of these companies is that it's tough to focus on the space part because you're really investing in the entire company, whereas space is just a part of Boeing or a subsidiary. Same thing as Lockheed, tons of experience here, tons of good stuff going on, even with the mishaps with ULA and SLS, which we'll get into a little bit later. Definitely do not dismiss Boeing. And then we have Northrop Grumman, which came out of Orbital ATK, another defense contractor, tons of experience. Wouldn't be surprised at all to see this one in the new fund. Lots of experience here, lots of history. Definitely do some research here. General Dynamics, specifically the mission systems segment, tons of experience here, big defense contractor, lots of aerospace experience, lots of history here. Everything from satellite components to the ground systems that support them, consulting services to get everything to work. Would not be surprised to see these guys make it in. Then we have Aerojet Rocketdyne. So they're going to be acquired by Lockheed, another defense company, tons of history, tons of experience. They've done all kinds of cool stuff. Here they're talking about missile defense, but really there's so much overlap in the technology between the defense world and what's going to be the commercial space world that you can't dismiss any of these companies. Here they're demonstrating the new Mars rover. Apparently they had a hand in that. And you can see here they worked on some of the propulsion systems, some big rockets here, working on the capsule systems. Very cool stuff. Wikipedia actually has a nice page here on them and some of the engines and products that they've developed. Here they talk about their ion thrusters, which are used in satellites to help adjust orbits. So really good stuff. And here you can see just this past December it was announced that they will be acquired by Lockheed for $4.4 billion. Now next we have Kratos. More of a satellite play here. They have ground station software to support those ground stations, but they're already in ARKQ, so don't be surprised to see them show up in ARKX as well. Then we have Airbus. So yeah, a company that makes all those wonderful commercial jetliners that you use to get to your vacation destination. They're also in the space industry, and they also own a portion of Arianespace. Lots of history and lots of experience there. Don't discount these big players. Talking about Earth observation, telecom, human spaceflight, launch systems, navigation, data systems, on-orbit services. That's what I'm really interested in, is these on-orbit services. So yeah, they're talking about the space tug. So similar to some of these other satellite plays, they're talking about refueling, moving satellites into different orbits, upgrading, inspecting. And that's the thing, these satellites, they're very expensive to launch, and if you can do a service operation in space so you don't have to throw away the entire satellite, that's a pretty big deal. Talking about cleanup, it's actually going to be a big problem going forward. There's so much space junk is what it's really called, orbiting the planet right now. Even the Starlink satellites, they have to have automated collision avoidance systems, so it's going to be a pretty big deal. Actually very curious to see if they make it in. A little bit about Arianespace here, you can go read. 40 years, like I say, a lot of history here. You can go see all the missions they've been involved in, the different launch vehicles they have. We tend to focus on SpaceX right now because they're doing all the cool reusable stuff, but it's taken a lot to get to this point. Okay, so next we have some private companies that you might have heard of and that you should probably watch out for. First one being Bigelow Aerospace. They have some modules on the ISS that they're testing out, these inflatable modules. Pretty cool stuff. Should do a little bit of research there. We have Blue Origin. Of course, this is the Jeff Bezos company. I imagine at some point they will become a pretty big player in the commercial space. We have Relativity Space. I'm really excited about this one. If there was a way to get into this one, I would love to do that. So they're drastically decreasing the complexity of their rocketry systems. So here they're talking about 3D printed rockets, far fewer parts than traditional rockets. This is a really cool company to look out for. It looks like they really want to compete with SpaceX someday. SpaceX is moving pretty fast. It's going to be pretty hard to compete, but competition is always a good thing, so can't complain about that. Every company going into space is a company that we should be behind and rooting for, because it's all toward the same goal. Just imagine, someday you could have these types of factories on other planets, making replacement rocket parts, which is really cool stuff. It's going to happen. Of course, we had SpaceX launch Elon's Roadster, so they're showing that they could also fit a car in there. Testing of the rockets, so, again, they're making pretty good progress here. Pretty excited about this one. Okay, then we have Firefly Aerospace. They're working with NASA right now to deliver payloads to the moon as part of the Artemis program, so watch out for them. Now, we talked about ULA, United Launch Alliance, a little bit earlier. This is, of course, the joint venture between Boeing and Lockheed. They're having all sorts of problems and schedule delays right now, but, chalk this up to management more than anything else. I don't think there are serious engineering problems. They've done so many government programs and private launches. They have so much experience. But they just can't seem to get it together with that Starliner program. And that's all I have to say about that. But again, don't underestimate Boeing or Lockheed. They have tons of smart people working who want to do good things. They're already high up government, the defense chain. They know that sector well. And those kinds of connections will really be invaluable in the market because the costs, risk, and timelines are just so high. And because a lot of fundamental space research traditionally has originated in government labs and through government contracts, SpaceX included, so don't dismiss those players. There's also Virgin Orbit here, so they're talking about doing small satellite launches, and they already have a little bit of experience through Virgin Galactic doing this type of launch system, where they go pretty high up into the atmosphere and then they launch from there. Looks like they already had a launch earlier this year, and from what I read, they've won a contract to launch for the military later this year, so, be interesting to see what the economics of this is versus the other launch systems, but one to look out for. And I didn't list these on the slide here, but there are a bunch of Chinese companies working on rockets as well, like Galactic Energy, Landspace, Linkspace, XPAC, iSpace, OneSpace, Deep Blue Aerospace, all of which I know absolutely nothing about, but I'm just mentioning it because someday, we could see something happen in the space industry similar to what's happened in the electric vehicle industry. Just something to think about there. Alright, so let's talk about satellite companies. So once you have launch infrastructure set up, then you can put things into orbit. So these are companies that put satellites or constellations of satellites up into orbit in order to provide services like telecommunications, weather guidance, remote sensing, and any other form of planetary surveillance. And you might clump companies like DirecTV in here as well, because they do offer satellite services, but I don't think they're innovative enough for this fund to think about. I mean, it's satellite TV, right? So possible, but not probable. And we already talked about Starlink, so I won't repeat it here, but make no mistake, we're going to have Starlink satellites orbiting around Mars someday, providing internet there, and also providing relays back to Earth. But on this list, we have Iridium. It's already in ARK and ARKQ. They offer satellite communications, so I wouldn't be surprised to see them here as well. Globalstar, another satellite communications company. This stock's been beat down so bad lately, and it's just recently seen a bit of recovery, so I'm not sure if it'll make it in or not, but it's always worth considering. L'Oreal, another communications play. I'm not sure about this one, but it's in the industry. I just really don't see companies like EchoStar making it in. Same thing with Viasat. I mean, I could be wrong. I just get the sense that Starlink is going to make so many of these companies obsolete, or at least to make them pivot into defense plays or other satellite consulting services. But I could be wrong. It remains to be seen. They do have infrastructure, they do have services, they do have customers, so just have to wait and see. Ticker symbol GILT on this one. Another ground station play that you could look at. These ground stations, I mean, they're not the most interesting part. The satellite's really the interesting part, but you have to have ground stations to have that uplink, so don't dismiss these companies either. Alright, AST Space Mobile, hesitated to put this in here because I don't trust the technology yet, but they are a company promised to bring 5G cellular access from satellites, and they're planning to go public via the SPAC called New Providence. Again, I'm just not sure about the technology or the timeline or the cost to do all this, but I'm including it here so you can consider it. I mean, here's the thing, the infrastructure to put all this up is going to be very, very expensive, and they're going to be competing with Starlink at the end of the day, and so we'll just have to see how this goes. Black Sky, super interesting company here, geospatial intelligence play, going public via SPAC called Osprey Technology. Ticker symbol on that one is SFTW. I'm really excited about this one. Some people have called it the Palantir of space. They already have customers, they have contacts in the industry. Definitely one to watch out for here. I would not be surprised at all if this makes it in. I'm guessing they would wait until after the merger goes through, but I think that this will be a very important part of the industry moving forward. Maxar, another geospatial intelligence play here. So all these companies, they're looking at getting data from space, from satellites. Looks like they also are responsible for the robotic arm on Perseverance. Looks like they're actually building satellites as well. That's definitely good to see. Same thing with Spire. They'll be going public via the SPAC Navsite Holdings, ticker symbol NSH, space powered data. So it sounds like they have their own constellation, and then they probably have some software. Maritime data, weather data, aviation data, CubeSats, so small satellites, probably some defense work here. Actually kind of excited about this one. Need to do a little bit more research, but yeah, could definitely see this making it in. Okay, so here we are on the second sector that ARK talks about. So the second sector that ARK talks about is suborbital aerospace. So they're talking about drones, air taxis, and electric aviation. So why are these important to consider? Well, we just saw earlier we had an aerial crane delivering the rover Perseverance the final few meters to the Martian surface. And now we have a drone that's going to be flying around on Mars. So not everything is going to be rocket powered simply because of the energies and the resources and the cost involved, right? So these companies, the technology that they build here on Earth, some of them will end up being used on other planets. Now I think this is probably the most undeveloped sector from what I know. We already talked about a few companies that easily fit into this category as well. I'm not going to repeat them here. But here are some of the more earthbound plays to consider. So here's Blade, going public via the SPAC merger with EXPC, Experience Investment, commuting by helicopter or seaplane within and around cities. It'll be interesting to see if this takes off. The idea here is that it's hard to get around cities. It's hard to get from point A to point B, so if they can make it easier, then yeah, I think people will definitely pay for that. Talking about doing electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So yeah, definitely one to watch out for. And then we have AeroVironment. They're doing drones, high altitude aircraft. Another one to watch out for. Just think about drones in general. Even companies like UPS are experimenting with drones. Amazon's experimenting with drones, of course, because they want to do last mile delivery. Here you have drones that are probably going to be used in the military space, but it doesn't take much to expand into the commercial space, whether you want to do mapping or you want to do some kind of remote sensing, perhaps for agriculture or for mining, resource management, mineral exploration, oil and gas exploration. So a lot of these companies, they might start out in one sector, but they can easily move to another one and expand their business. Honeywell, I didn't know exactly where to put them because they do absolutely everything. But what's particularly interesting here, I think, is the work on drones, work on sensors. They have interesting history. They're talking about air taxis as well. Honeywell is a great company. They do a lot of good things. Here's BAE. So here they're picturing some unmanned aircraft, talking about sensing, mostly a military play here, but again, a lot of these technologies end up transferring into the commercial sector. We'll talk about this more later. Radiation hardened electronics. They have a lot of experience here. And then one that you might not think about, I saw that Rolls-Royce is working in this area as well. They're working on ideas for electric aviation. So it'll be really cool to see if they can pivot to this. So here they're talking about battery innovations, a lot of the same things that Tesla's having to deal with, trying to increase capacity, decrease weight. Once you get that power to weight ratio in place, then electric aviation is going to be a thing. It's really just a matter of time. And there are really too many drone companies to talk about. So if you're interested, here's a good list. You can do some research yourself. And I'm not going to talk too much more about this sector because I think a lot of these companies we've talked about already will be playing in this area as well and have some overlap. So third, we have what ARK calls enabling technologies. ARK lists AI, robotics, 3D printing, materials, energy storage. These are all necessary to commoditize space access. I'm going to add in sensors, software, data analysis into the mix because I think they're also important. Sensors, of course, are super important because you need data to make decisions, and often in an automated way where you don't have humans involved, right? Even when we do have humans going to space, you're not always going to be sending them out to make measurements or to observe things, right? A lot of this is going to be automated. And even if they are going out, they're still going to have devices that help them to take measurements, right? So what are we talking about? Companies like FLIR, they do the infrared cameras, lots of military experience here, but also FLIR machine vision cameras are headed to Mars. So they're on the rover, and they assisted with a lot of the landing operations already. Teledyne, big sensor play here. They make sensors that work in all parts of the electromagnetic spectrum for satellites, and they're actually going to be acquiring FLIR. I'm actually curious to see if a company like Microvision can make it into space. It's just a thought, but 3D sensing, scanning is going to be a really big deal in the space environment. Trimble is another interesting one. They deal in remote sensing, laser scanning, and they're already in ARKQ and the 3D printing ETF, PRNT. Land surveying, mapping, GIS, laser scanning, mobile mapping, remote sensing, photogrammetry, forensics, monitoring, tunneling, all relevant services. So L3 Harris, another big one for sensors, and all kinds of electronics really. Traditionally a defense play, but this will also move over into the commercial sector. L3 Harris designed radio frequency circuits and other 3D printed components flying on ISS. They were selected to develop defense satellite system. So lots of stuff happening here. Next, let's talk about semiconductors. Here's the thing, you can't just use your everyday Intel or AMD processor that you pick up at Best Buy in space because they just won't work too well. See, as soon as you leave the atmosphere, then you're in a harsh radiation environment, and if you don't have radiation hardened chips, is what they're called, then you start to get all kinds of problems when you're trying to crunch numbers, all kinds of errors, and things just go downhill from there. If you can't do reliable computation, then you really can't do anything. So here's a company, Xilinx. They're a chip fab. They make semiconductors specifically for use in space. So you can go read about them. They're talking about space-grade products. They've been tested. They have a proven track record. So a good company to look out for here. So here's Skywater, another chip maker, currently private, but just be on the lookout for this one. And now Global Foundries, they're supposed to go public next year, in 2022, already doing defense chip work. Keep an eye out for this one. All kinds of technology here. Radar, GPS, processing, power controllers, avionics, and specifically high altitude and space. And then let's talk AI and robotics. So here's one startup called Gitai, I don't know how you say it. But they've raised some money here to do robotics for commercial space operations. So they're talking about building the robotic workforce of commercial space. So here's something I've actually always been really fascinated with. We're going to need a lot of robotic workers to work in that harsh space environment. So I'm glad that someone's working on it. Private for now, but really keep an eye out for this one. Looks like they're making good progress. They want to work with these other organizations and companies, right? So it's all about cutting down the cost of access, So if they can do what they want to do, build general purpose robots, then it's going to be a pretty big deal. Here's Berkshire Grey, another robotics company. They're going public via the SPAC called Revolution Acceleration. They're focused on fulfillment robots right now, but just wait, because a lot of these machine learning software and algorithms will be used to move things around space as well. C3 AI, another artificial intelligence play. Won't be surprised if they drive some of the software that either helps with consulting or that actually makes it into the software that goes into space. Alright, so let's talk about 3D printing. So 3D printing is going to be absolutely huge in space, where it's difficult to deliver things quickly, and many components are going to have to be built to order and on demand. If we really want to go to space and we want to maintain a presence there for the long haul, then we're going to need innovative manufacturing techniques. And nothing's more innovative in the manufacturing space than 3D printing, and the technology here is just getting better and better all the time. So we have some of the expected names and some new players. So everyone's favorite, Nano Dimension, it's going to be a big one. They're already talking about 3D printed RF systems for space applications. Good stuff here. Mark forged via the A1 SPAC, 3D Systems, Desktop Metals working with metal and carbon fiber. We have Stratasys, which is already an ARK-K, ARK-Q, and Pure NT. We have Protolabs, X1, Sigma Labs, Velo 3D, which is going public via the Jaws Spitfire SPAC. Talking about engine components, turbopump components, heat exchangers. Very relevant to space here. Materialize, and there are more. And then we have the everything else bucket, what I'm calling the support sector. ARK is calling beneficiary companies. And these are companies that can utilize all of the above platforms to really turn us into a spacefaring civilization. So ARK mentions agriculture, internet access, GPS, construction, imaging. I'm going to include everything from resource management, space mining, manufacturing, power, materials, healthcare, food, and really anything else that advances our move into space. And there are tons of companies that can make the list here that we just don't have time to get into. We could do a whole separate video there. But just think of all the manufacturing companies, software verification, quality assurance testing companies, insurance eventually, mining companies, energy. The list just goes on and on. But to get through some of them, let's talk about GPS. We have Garmin, longtime player in the GPS world. They make equipment for both recreation and aviation uses. A lot of experience here with weather, traffic management, could be interesting. Same thing with Qualcomm. I'm listing it here because of the expertise in communications chips. Same thing with Broadcom. And then let's talk about healthcare for a minute. ARK hasn't talked about this one, but I think this is going to be pretty important. We're going to be bringing innovative technologies with us and very miniaturized equipment. So I think companies like Butterfly, companies like Nanox, and we have some materials companies, CPS Technologies working with composites and other advanced materials used in satellites and other aerospace applications. Park Aerospace, another advanced composites maker. Agriculture is another big topic that not many people are talking about. You gotta eat in space, right? So App Harvest, growing things indoors. Square Roots, this is Elon's brother Kimball's company, currently private. And then we have power. So solar is an obvious play, but I personally think that we're going to have nuclear as a foundation for the eventual Martian grid to deal with those pesky Martian dust storms that go on for a long time. And for probes and other long-term autonomous vehicles, we'll probably use nuclear. We're already using nuclear on Perseverance. Pretty sure that we'll continue to go down that route. For larger reactors, for base power, companies like Babcock Wilcox, lots of experience here in reactors. I'm going to wager that this is a little bit too legacy, but perhaps they can pivot to materials and provide some expertise there. Companies I'm more interested in are private right now, companies like NuScale, companies like TerraPower, these sorts of modular reactors that are a lot smaller in scale, easier to assemble. I think they'll have a place. And last but not least, Tesla. Now, I know what you're thinking, Tesla's every place already, but we know how much ARK loves Tesla, and seriously, I could see Tesla making a list in some capacity. Maybe not a huge position, since it already makes up large parts of ARK-K, ARK-Q, ARK-W, but think about it. Solar panels, electric vehicles. Come on guys, we're not going to be driving around internal combustion engines when we get to Mars. First because there's no oxygen, well, at least not enough. So think about it. Look at the Cybertruck. I mean, this thing's built to drive over some Martian rocks, right? I think NASA got some inspiration from this thing for the new Mars rover. And when you think about what Tesla's really doing, they're building the machines that build the machines. They're going to be at the forefront of manufacturing ability and automation, not to mention AI and vehicle design, self-driving, autonomy, and all of these things are going to come together to help design and manufacture vehicles and other machines for use on other planets outside Earth. It's really quite beautiful when you think about it, and it seems fitting that Tesla and SpaceX, once it goes public, could end up being the top 2 holdings in ARKX someday in the near future, and I think it's all going to happen faster than any of us expect. In fact, all of Elon's companies, the Boring Company, Neuralink, Tesla, SpaceX, Starlink, they all have some kind of space application. And everything fits together really nicely when you think about it that way. Just a thought. Okay, so how did we do? Well, we did pretty well actually. So let's go down the list here. So we got Trimble. They have the 3D printing ETF. So this is ARK's PRNT ETF for 3D printing. I didn't expect that they would include the entire ETF, but let's go take a look at that one. X1, we have that one. Trimble again. 3D Systems, Stratasys, Protolabs, Desktop Metal, Materialize, Aerojet Rocketdyne we talked about. And that looks like about it from that list. Let's go back here. We got Kratos, we got L3 Harris, we got Lockheed, we got Iridium, Thales. Oh, I totally forgot about Thales. Yeah, Thales is another good one. Boeing, we talked about Boeing. Some of these I'm surprised to see on the list, like Amazon. Kind of surprised to see it on here. We talked about Teledyne, we talked about Garmin, Virgin Galactic. We talked about Airbus, we got that right. AeroVironment, Honeywell, we got that one too. Workhorse. That's another interesting play. I know that ARK does like Workhorse. I'm kind of done with Workhorse, but that's just me. Taiwan Semiconductor, yeah, I thought about putting them on here, but I don't know how much experience they have with rad hardened chips. It would be an interesting space for them to get into for sure. Xilinx, we got that one. So yeah, we did pretty well here. So I think if we count all these up, we got about a third of these. And if you include some of the holdings from the PRNT ETF, then we did even better. So yeah, pretty happy with the picks here. Anyway, that's all I have for today. I'm sure there's tons of companies that you guys are thinking of that I've left out, but I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of this. Let me know what companies I've left out of the list. Always do your own research, and I'll see you in the next one.